Iceland. The year is 1244. Men on horseback are pushing west over a windswept ridge called Hrútafjarðarháls. Not fairy tale characters, real men riding through some of the bloodiest years in Icelandic history. Their leader is a man called Ásbjörn Guðmundsson. The weather's coming across that ridge sideways, and then something comes up out of it and crosses the road in front of them. It stops. It doesn't run. It just stands there in the open and lets them stare. Armed men in the hardest century Iceland ever had, and they're terrified. Ásbjörn keeps his head, and the account gives us 3 words in Old Norse. Tröll, Eitt, Mikit. A great troll. And then the story just moves on. Back to the feuds, back to the politics. Like a monster in the road is barely worth the ink. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. Those 3 words have been sitting in the historical record of medieval Iceland for almost 800 years. And when you hear that, what do you picture? Big, ugly, dumb as a box of rocks, lives in a cave, comes out at night, and if the sun catches him, he cracks into stone. He's under the bridge. He's in every fantasy game you've ever touched. He's on the souvenir shelf. And that picture might be almost completely wrong. Because when those men in 1244 said they saw a troll, the word may not have meant anything close to what you just imagined. Not the size, not the shape, not the cave, not the turning to stone. So we're going to take that one word and follow it all the way from the earliest medieval records right up to today. Because the trolls are still here. Now, before we start this little trip down Nordic memory lane, I'm going to apologize right up front for the ears that I am about to offend with my pronunciation of some of these words. Now, the first mistake almost everybody makes with trolls is that we walk in asking what a troll looks like. And that question already assumes the answer. It assumes a troll is one specific thing, a species, a creature you could draw a picture of, with features that separate it from a giant and an elf and a witch. Modern fantasy trained us to think that way. Clean little boxes, one creature per box. The medieval sources don't work like that. There's a medievalist named Ármann Jakobsson who has built a chunk of his career on this exact problem, and he lays it out in a book called The Troll Inside You. What he found chasing the word troll through the Old Norse text is that it's not the name of a monster at all. It's a category. It's the word people used when they saw something outside the normal order of the world. A troll could be a giant. It could be one of the beings they called Jotun. It could be a Thors or a Risi or other giant-flavored beings. But it could also be a witch, a ghost, the Walking Dead, a magic worker, a person who'd become so monstrous they'd stop being fully human. The categories bleed into each other, and they shift depending on who's telling the story. So the medieval troll wasn't a species. It was a category of otherness, the word for a thing that didn't fit. Which means that when those men in 1244 said Tröll, Eitt, Mikit, we don't actually know what they were picturing. Mikit means great. Great might mean physically enormous, or it might mean looming and terrible and wrong. They might have seen a strange human being and reached for the only word that covered strange. Now, otherness as a scary thing to avoid is not a new idea. Many cultures independently produced a similar shape, a being marking the boundary between the human world and the wild, often beaten by wit rather than force. But the Nordic countries have their own troll folklore tradition, and it's that specific version that became the dominant popular image across the Western world. But how did we go from this wide open category of not normal to the rock monster on the big screen today? Well, we need to go way back and start with a piece of Old Norse poetry called Helga Kvitha Hjörvarðssonar. It survives in one Icelandic manuscript, the Codex Regius, written down in the 1270s, and the poetry inside it is older than the book. How much older, we have no idea. In it, a man named Hethin is walking home out of the forest on Yule Eve, and he meets a troll woman. But she's not hiding under a bridge. She's riding a wolf, and the reins in her hands, the reins she's steering that wolf with, are snakes. Live snakes. She wants his company. He turns her down. She promises he'll pay for that, and the whole thing just goes downhill from there. Now picture that next to a lumpy cave ogre gnawing on a goat. Wow, things have changed a bit in the last 1,000 years. There's another being in that same poem named Hrimgurthur. Helgi, the hero, has killed Hrimgurthur's father, a Jotun named Hati. So she comes for him at night to settle the score. But Helgi and his man Atli don't fight her. They argue with her. They trade insults back and forth, and they keep it going, and every single exchange is a stall because they know what sunrise does. And when the sun finally comes up over the water, it catches Hrimgurthur and turns her to stone. Petrification is also part of the greatest troll fight in the Icelandic sagas. And just so you know, Icelandic sagas are like medieval Icelandic versions of a true crime podcast, except the crimes are 300 years old and everyone's related. The sagas are the historical account of that period of Iceland's history. In the Greatest Saga, we get the story of an outlaw and monster hunter named Grettir Ásmundarson, who goes to a place called Sandhauger to do battle with a troll woman who's been stealing people at this particular farm every Yule Eve. These troll women seem to be a special kind of trouble.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
The household goes off to church, Grettir stays behind alone, and the girl troll shows up right on schedule. What follows is a long, brutal, dragged across the farm brawl that eventually leads to a waterfall and a cave. Now, what happens in the end depends on where you lived. There are actually 2 different local legends that are both recorded. One says Grettir wounded her and she went down into the gorge and disappeared. The other says daylight caught her outside and turned her into a hideous stone formation. Interesting. Now a rock may not just be a rock. It could be a corpse. And that move, turning the land into the leftover remains of a monster, becomes one of the biggest ideas in the whole tradition. A boulder is never just a boulder over there. Either something put it there, or something is it. Which brings us to the one thing that everybody knows about trolls. Sunlight turns them to stone. It's the one rule. And sometimes, like in that last story, some did. But a lot of them apparently didn't. According to the Swedish Institute for Language and Folklore, petrifying in sunlight is especially a feature of the fairy tale troll, the storybook troll. And Camilla Asplund Ingemark, who did a huge study of the Finland-Swedish traditions, has material full of trolls just hanging out in the middle of the day. So yes, we just had 2 stories of trolls turning to stone in the sun, and whole landscapes get explained as troll carcasses. But it was never the rule. It was one motif among many, and pop culture grabbed it and blew it up into a universal law of troll biology. And a lot of these trolls weren't giant. They weren't grotesque. Some could pass for completely human. Some were even described as beautiful. They wore nice clothes. And the only crack in the disguise might be one weird little feature. Unusually big ears or weird nose. Maybe a tail that kept tucked away. Their lives looked a lot like ours. They married and had families. They kept cattle, made food, churned their butter. They had wealth. They'd ask humans for help and repay the favor. So we have a whole second society living in the same landscape as everybody else, just normally out of sight. And at this point, the line between trolls and the other hidden folk, what they call the underjordiska, the underground people, gets really blurry. Remember, nothing here fits in a clean little box. But once you accept that these are people with homes, some of the weirdest stories start to kind of make sense. There's multiple versions of a Scandinavian tale about humans who build a barn right on top of a hidden home without knowing it. Then the waste from the human barn, the dirty water, the urine from the livestock, starts leaking down into the hidden house underneath, right onto the troll's dinner table. And the trolls are not happy. In some versions, they retaliate. But sometimes they're a little more neighborly. In one story from that Finland-Swedish collection, the trolls bring the human down into their impressive underground house and show him the horse urine dripping onto their table. And the humans move the barn. There's even a Swedish warning that says you shouldn't dump boiling water on the ground without first calling out to whatever might be living underneath. Which sounds a little nuts, but look at what that says. Humans do not own the landscape just because they can't see anyone else living on it. The land came with neighbors, and there were manners involved. Most of the danger in these stories isn't a hero hunting a monster. It's ordinary people accidentally being rude to the folks next door. And hang on to that barn, because we're going to watch a modern government agency face exactly the same problem. And the stories aren't all ancient either. One account was written down in Sweden in 1930 from a man named Carl Nival. He tells the story of a young woman working alone out at a remote pasture. The trolls show up and decide she's going to marry one of their sons. So they put her in a wedding dress and put a silver crown on her head. But she gets a message out. She sends her dog for help.
Something out there?
A farm worker comes running with a gun, fires a warning shot, and the trolls scatter into the forest. And the girl is left standing there, still in the bridal dress, still wearing the silver crown. Supposedly, the crown is kept somewhere in Ransäter Parish to this day. Or there's this one. Sweden, 1926. A woman named Knut Anna Jonsdotter, born in 1839, tells an interviewer about a girl left alone to watch the cattle in the summer pasture, which is like a mini farm set up so people could stay there for the entire summer. It's not even daylight yet when the girl hears this huge ruckus of cowbells and mooing and yelling. And she looks out the cabin window, and coming through the pasture is a huge herd of black cattle being driven by a bunch of trolls. When her relatives finally come back, they find her almost out of her mind, totally freaked out. Or take this one. A man rides past a hill late at night, and suddenly there's a building there that's never been there before. He goes in and finds a warm, real, bustling household. And then he says the name of Jesus. Everything vanishes, and he finds himself sitting on a rotten tree stump on the hillside. Those aren't fairy tales, and that distinction matters here. The Swedish folklore authorities separate the fairy tale from what they call a sägen, a folk legend. A fairy tale doesn't claim to be true, and everybody in the room knows it. A legend gets told like it happened. It gets pinned to a real place, sometimes to named real people. This happened to her over by that mountain, which is a lot closer to a modern encounter report than Once Upon a Time, which leads to one of the ideas in all of Scandinavian folklore that, if you watch this channel enough, should sound pretty familiar. There's a word, bergtugning, which means literally being taken into the mountain. A person disappears out of the ordinary human world because something took them. Trolls, or maybe the underground people. And the endings vary. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they come back, but not quite right.
Hey, your skin is hanging off your bones.
Is that leather?
Sometimes they've been gone way longer than they thought. And sometimes they never come back at all. Can you say missing 411? The Swedish sources connect these traditions directly to trolls and the hidden folk, and they note that the stories worked for the people telling them as an explanation for the disappearances. Line those up next to fairy abductions, changelings, missing time, hidden communities, people who walk into the woods and are just gone. The shapes rhyme. Different traditions keep reaching for the same handful of motifs. They're not describing the same literal thing, but a farming village in Sweden and 100 other traditions all built the same story. Which brings us back to those boulders. Why is there an enormous rock sitting all by itself in a field next to a church? Modern geology has an answer. Glaciers dragged rocks around and dropped them when they melted. Fine. Boring. Probably true. But folklore has a better one. Something threw it. Because in the later tradition, trolls and giant beings called Utools are forever trying to destroy churches by chucking gigantic rocks at them. The bells drive the troll crazy, so it winds up and hurls a boulder at the steeple. The stone misses, lands out in the field, and it sits there for the next 1,000 years as physical evidence that the story is true. And Scandinavia is covered in this stuff. Trolltunga, the troll's tongue. Trollstenen, the troll's path. Trollvägen, the troll wall. Trollheimen, Trollfjorden. Tourism has juiced a few of those up, but the link between that word and the most jagged, impossible-looking geography in the country runs two ways. Sometimes the troll shaped the land. It threw the rock. It carved the gorge. And sometimes the troll became the land. The sun caught it. It turned to stone, and the monster is still there, and it's the size of a cliff, which opens a pretty wild possibility. Maybe the troll wasn't only a creature living in nature. Maybe it became a way of imagining that nature itself was alive, and that would be an awesome place to stop. Except the stories didn't stop. Let's go back to Iceland again. There's a lava field outside Reykjavik called Gálgahraun, the gallows lava, between the town of Garðabær and the Álftanes Peninsula. In 2007, the authorities want to put a road through it, and a group called Hraunvinir, Friends of the Lava, start fighting the project. Part of their argument is environmental, but some of it is about one specific rock that's right in the path of the proposed road. That rock has a name, Ófeigskirkja, or Ófeigs Church. In the local tradition, it isn't a rock at all. It's a church belonging to the hidden people. So, Friends of the Lava start fighting the project. By December 2013, the fight is in front of the Supreme Court of Iceland, and construction has stopped. American outlets pick up the story because it reads like a joke headline. NPR runs it as Highway in Iceland may be sidetracked by elves. Finally, in March of 2015, they compromise. Ófeigskirkja doesn't get blasted. It gets lifted. 2 pieces, 50 tons and 20 tons, hauled up and set back down beside similar formations so the road can go through and the church can go on being a church. A modern European state with engineers and courts and a budget moved a 50-ton rock instead of destroying it to appease the hidden people. Here's an even better one. Up north, there's a town called Siglufjörður. In 2015, road crews clearing a landslide off the road into town bury a rock. The locals call it the Elf Lady Stone. Then the trouble starts. The road floods, which does even more damage. A construction worker gets hurt during the cleanup. Repair equipment breaks down, and a journalist who came out to cover the whole mess falls into a mud pool. And in August of 2016, the Iceland Road Administration goes back out there, digs the Elf Lady Stone out of the ground, and washes it clean in an effort to make everything right again. Machines break, roads flood. There's nothing supernatural. The remarkable part is that a government agency in the 21st century went back out with equipment and dug a rock back up just in case. Go back to that Swedish farmer told to move his barn because the waste was leaking onto somebody's table. Same thing. The land has residents you didn't check with. 800 years and a whole industrial revolution later, and Iceland is still checking. Technically, these are hidden folk stories, elves, not trolls, and Icelandic tradition does keep those separate. But you remember what we said at the very beginning, those fences were never solid. So, the hidden folk never left. The troll, though, went quiet. Somewhere between that ridge and 1244, which to me sounds like a scene right out of a Stephen King novel. And today,
Here she is. There's my princess.
he stopped being a thing you might run into and became a thing you buy for good luck. Somebody did that to him, and I want to know who. The modern fairy tale troll has one defining feature that the old troll women riding wolves absolutely did not have. He's dumb. Powerful, sure. Enormous, sometimes, but many fries short of a Happy Meal. That trait started with the folk stories of the Norwegian character Askeladden, the Ash Lad, the youngest brother everybody underestimates, who keeps winning through nerve and brains. And there's a tale called The Boy Who Had an Eating Match with a Troll that shows you how it works. The troll threatens him. So Askeladden pulls out a hunk of cheese, tells the troll that it's a rock, squeezes it until the whey runs out, and says, "Look how strong I am. I can wring water out of a rock." And the troll buys it. And then they have an eating contest, and Askeladden ties a bag under his shirt and shoves the food into that instead of his stomach. And when the bag's full, he cuts it open, no problem, and cheerfully suggests the troll try the same trick. And the troll cuts its own belly open. The human survives by lying. The stronger monster destroys itself. That became a massive pattern in the Norwegian tales, and the meaning underneath is pretty simple. The monster belongs to the old wilderness. The clever little human belongs to the new, expanding, cultivated world. Every time Askeladden tricks a troll to death, it's civilization beating the wild. Another common trait is that troll equals thing under a bridge. That idea is basically locked in by the success of the story The Three Billy Goats Gruff, an old folktale that, just like the last story, was finally written down and published by Peter Christian Asbjørnsen and Jørgen Mua in 1843. But across the actual Scandinavian tradition, trolls are far more tied to mountains, forests, rocks, caves, and hidden underground spaces than to bridges. The bridge troll is authentic folklore. It's just one wildly successful story that took over the whole brand. Which leaves one more big question. If the medieval troll was a blurry category and the folk belief troll could look like your neighbor, then where did our troll come from? The one we can all picture with our eyes closed. A big piece of the answer is in the 1800s. Asbjørnsen and Mua didn't invent Norwegian troll stories. They collected oral ones and put them in books. But that act changes folklore. Once a fluid, shape-shifting oral story becomes a printed book, one version gets frozen and gains authority. And then illustrators come along and give the creature bodies, faces, sizes, postures, and suddenly millions of people can picture the exact same monster for the first time in history. Norway's National Museum names Theodor Kittelsen and Erik Werenskjold as the classic illustrators of this tradition. Over in Sweden, you've got Jon Bauer, and those enormous mossy forest trolls looming over tiny, delicate princesses. Kittelsen in particular did something extraordinary. His trolls barely look separate from the landscape. A mountain grows eyes, a shadow thickens into a body, a giant nose is basically a boulder. Moss becomes hair. The creature doesn't look like it walked into the scenery. It looks like it is the scenery. These artists didn't invent the troll's ugliness out of thin air, but they canonized one particular troll, and it stuck so hard we forgot it was a choice. The troll wasn't always ugly. Artists made him ugly, which begs the question, how many other things people once called trolls would we just not recognize as trolls today? I went looking for the modern version of 1244. Somebody in the last 100 years on the record saying they met one. And I found them in the Northern Isles, which makes sense because that's the one place outside of Scandinavia where the word itself stayed alive on people's tongues. Start with Unst, the northernmost inhabited island in Shetland. In 1974, a woman was recorded describing something she had seen 60 years earlier in 1914 when she was 10 years old playing with a friend inside a ruined house. All at once, there was this white from one side and black from the other side. Just wee things about this height, just like men. These little man armies were roughly 2 feet tall or less and came from opposite sides and fought this wee people battle until they all eventually disappeared. Now go west to Orkney, to the island of Hoy and a cliff top at Torness. August of 1964. A man out walking looked up to see a dozen or more wild men dancing about to and fro. And just like in the last story, these were little guys that he describes as having round, pale faces with long, scraggly hair. He also said they did not have long noses. Oddly specific, and they did not look friendly. Back to Iceland. In 2003, a girl named Laura Bjarnadottir tells a story from the summer of 1937 when she was 8 years old. She's playing on a large rock outside her farmhouse when a woman's angry voice comes up out of the rock underneath her feet, telling her that if she doesn't get down off of it right now, she will be punished. Laura jumps off the rock and runs. And 66 years later, she still knows exactly which rock it was. And don't make the mistake of thinking these are the ramblings of old people from an era devoid of modern science. Here's a bunch of sightings from the last 20 years just from Sweden alone. In the Dalarna area, around 2003-2004, a guy riding his moped at night sees what looks like an animal's rear end standing at the edge of the road, but its legs are too thick to be an elk. It has a round, fuzzy ball body, dark, long fur, and no visible arms. He guns the engine and the thing runs off on 2 legs. Or this one, same area, same time frame. 3 hunters are driving in a car before sunrise when a broad-shouldered, neckless, roughly 3 to 4 foot creature crosses the road in the headlights. As hunters, they're sure was not a boar, an elk, or a bear. The summer of 2009, 2 people are roasting hot dogs in their camp at dusk when they hear something in the trees. Out of the tree line, the silhouette of a fuzzy ball with 2 legs steps out and starts moving toward them. They run, but they can still hear fast footsteps circling them before everything goes quiet. And by the way, this one happened in the Västergötland area of Sweden, which contains the city of Trollhättan, the troll's hat. Then there's the story from Hälsingland, Sweden, where a guy riding with his grandma spots something not quite right out in the woods. His grandma says, "Oh yeah, I've seen that thing before. When I was a kid, we moved away from our house because of the ones living in that stretch of forest." And what do all of these stories actually describe? Small humanoid figures, nothing like the either terrifying or sparkling versions we've all been trained to identify as trolls. So, what are we learning here? Well, if you're looking for a troll, appearance is a terrible measure. They're big, small, hideous, beautiful, stupid, and dangerously smart. You cannot pin the troll down by what it looks like because it never looked like any one thing. The one commonality is that the troll belongs to the places that aren't fully under human control. The mountain, the deep forest, the cave, the isolated valley. The troll lives on the far side of the line between the cleared, cultivated human world and everything beyond it. And that's the key. The troll isn't defined by horns or height or habitat. A troll is the thing that is not us. It's whatever's out there past the edge of the map we've drawn around ourselves. And that not us category, that it changes shape as we do. We didn't discover what a troll is, we built it. And the strangest part is that the troll might represent whoever or whatever we imagine was here before us. Ancient, already there, living past the churches and the fences, displaced as our world kept expanding into theirs. The troll is the ghost of whoever had the land before we did. So let's go back to Iceland. It's 1244. A group of men are riding across a ridge in the west of the country, and something crosses their path. They're terrified, and the report they file uses 3 words: a great troll. And then almost 800 years of silence. Nobody can say what those men saw out there. But I don't even think that's the deepest mystery anymore. The oldest troll mystery isn't whether those men really saw a monster on the ridge. It's something a lot harder to answer than that. Whatever crossed their path that day, what was it really that made troll the only word that fit? A windswept ridge called Hrutafjarðarhál. Poetry called Helgakvitha Hjarðarvötn. In one Icelandic manuscript, the Codex, it catches Hrimgr. The other hidden folk, what they called the Underjordiska, girl named Laura Bjarnadottir. A girl named Laura Bjarnadottir. A girl named Laura Bjarnadottir. Laura Bjarnadottir. In 2003, a girl named Laura Bjarnadottir, Kristen Abjornsson, and Jorgen Mua. I almost had it.